Found out my wife had lied about why she couldn't have children while sitting in a fertility clinic beside a woman who wasn't my wife. The doctor said one sentence. I laughed because I thought he'd made a mistake. Then he turned his computer screen toward me. My wife's name was there. So was a procedure she'd had 9 years earlier. 3 years before we met. And in less than 30 seconds every night I'd held her while she cried about never becoming a mother started to feel like something she'd rehearsed. My wife's name is Claire. We'd been married for 6 years. For 4 of those years I believed we couldn't have children because Claire had a medical condition she'd been diagnosed with in her 20s. I won't pretend I understood every detail. I didn't. She told me pregnancy was extremely unlikely and potentially dangerous. That was enough for me. When you love someone, you don't ask them to prove the worst thing that's ever happened to them. You hold them. You listen. You learn which relatives not to invite to dinner because they'll ask when you're having kids. I became very good at protecting Claire from that question. My mother asked once during Christmas. Claire left the table. I followed her upstairs and found her sitting on the edge of the bed crying. I held her for nearly an hour. Then I went downstairs and told my mother never to ask us about children again. We didn't speak properly for 2 months after that. Claire knew. She watched me damage my relationship with my own mother defending a pain she had invented. That's the memory that bothers me most now. Not the clinic. Not the medical records. Christmas. Because I remember Claire squeezing my hand in the car afterward and telling me she didn't know what she'd do without me. I thought I'd been a good husband. Now I wonder if I was just easy to use. The truth is, I wanted children. Badly. I grew up with 2 brothers in a house that was always loud. Someone was always shouting from another room. There were shoes everywhere. The fridge was empty no matter how much food my parents bought. I hated it when I was 16. By 30, it was exactly what I wanted. Claire knew that before our first date. We met through friends, and apparently I'd spent half the evening playing football with someone's 6-year-old nephew. She used to joke that it was the reason she liked me. A year into our relationship, she told me about her condition. I remember driving home alone afterward. I cried in my car. I'm embarrassed saying that because it wasn't happening to my body. But I knew what it meant. If I stayed with Claire, the life I'd pictured probably wasn't going to happen. I thought about leaving. There. That's the ugliest truth in this story. For maybe 2 weeks, I seriously considered ending the relationship. Claire never knew. Then one night I looked at her asleep beside me and realized I couldn't imagine replacing her with a hypothetical child who didn't exist. So I stayed. And once I made that decision, I committed to it completely. I stopped talking about children. I stopped looking when I passed baby clothes in shops. When friends announced pregnancies, I learned to smile before looking at Claire. We built a different future. Travel. A bigger house eventually. Maybe a dog. I told myself it was enough. Most days, it was. Then my younger brother had a daughter. Her name is Lily. The first time I held her, something inside me cracked open. I loved that little girl immediately. And I hated myself for how much it hurt. Claire noticed. Of course she noticed. That night, she cried harder than I did. She kept apologizing. I spent the entire evening comforting her for not being able to give me children. Read that again. I comforted her. For a decision she'd already made before she even knew my name. I didn't know that yet. The first crack in Claire's story came from my brother's wife, Sophie. She and my brother had been trying for a second child and were seeing a fertility specialist. One afternoon, Sophie called me from the clinic. My brother had been delayed at work, and she didn't want to sit alone after an appointment. I worked 10 minutes away, so I went. We sat in a waiting room drinking terrible coffee until a nurse called Sophie back. She asked me to come with her. The doctor was going through family history. Sophie mentioned Claire. She said my wife had a condition that made pregnancy dangerous. The doctor asked what condition. I told him the name Claire had given me. He looked confused. Then he asked if I was sure. I was. I'd repeated that name to family members. I'd searched it online at 2 a.m. I'd built my entire adult life around it. The doctor turned to his computer. I watched his face change. He asked how long Claire and I had been married. Then he asked when we'd met. My stomach dropped before he said anything else. He couldn't discuss another patient's medical history. I understand that, but he didn't need to. Because when he turned the screen away, I saw Claire's name. And beside it was a date. 9 years earlier. next to one word I recognized immediately: sterilization. I sat there beside my sister-in-law, staring at the wall. Claire hadn't discovered she couldn't have children. She'd made sure she never would. And 3 years later, she met me. I didn't confront Claire that night. I went home and made dinner. That's the part people never understand when I tell them this. They imagine you discover a lie that big and immediately start screaming. I didn't. I chopped an onion. Claire sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone while I cooked pasta. She looked exactly the same. That terrified me. For 4 years, I'd believed I could see the pain on her face whenever children came up. Now, I was standing 3 feet away, wondering how much of my wife I'd ever actually seen. Claire asked about Sophie's appointment. I told her it went fine. Then she asked if the doctor had said anything interesting. My hand stopped for half a second. Maybe she noticed. Maybe she didn't. I told her no. That night, I lay beside her and searched sterilization procedures on my phone. I learned more in 3 hours than I wanted to know. There were different methods, different reasons, different chances of reversal. I kept looking for a medical explanation that would save Claire. Maybe the procedure had been necessary. Maybe she'd had cancer. Maybe there'd been an emergency. I wanted there to be a scarier truth underneath the lie, something that would make me feel guilty for doubting her. The next morning, I called the clinic. They told me exactly what I expected. They couldn't discuss Claire. So I called a different fertility clinic. I booked an appointment for myself. I felt ridiculous, sitting there alone. I told the specialist my wife had been sterilized before we met, and that I wanted to understand what that meant for us. He explained that the details depended on the procedure. Then he said something I hadn't allowed myself to think about. IVF could still sometimes be an option. I remember staring at him. For 4 years, Claire had spoken about children like the door was welded shut. We'd never seen a specialist together. Never discussed IVF properly. Never looked at alternatives. Whenever I brought up adoption in the early years, Claire became too upset to continue. And I had respected that. Suddenly, respect felt a lot like blindness. I went through our old messages. I searched words like baby, children, pregnancy, IVF. It was brutal. There were hundreds. Messages from the beginning of our relationship. Claire telling me she was terrified I'd leave. Me promising I wouldn't. Claire apologizing for taking fatherhood away from me. Me telling her she hadn't taken anything. One message made me put my phone down. It was from 5 years earlier. I told her I chose her. Claire replied that she hoped I never regretted that choice. I had read that message as insecurity. Now it sounded like a warning. For the next week, I watched Claire. I hated myself for it. She'd leave her laptop open and I'd notice. Her phone would light up, and my eyes went there automatically. I was becoming suspicious of someone I'd trusted with every part of my life. Then my mother called. We hadn't discussed children in years. She wanted to tell me Sophie was struggling after the fertility appointment. Before hanging up, she apologized. For Christmas. 4 years later, my mother was still apologizing for asking one question. I sat in my car after the call and cried. Not because Claire didn't want children. I need to make that clear. She had every right not to want them. She had every right to make decisions about her own body. If Claire had told me on our first date that she never wanted children, I would have been hurt. Maybe we wouldn't have had a second date. And I think that's exactly why she lied. That thought stayed with me. Maybe Claire hadn't lied because she was ashamed. Maybe she'd lied because she knew the truth would give me a choice. And she didn't trust me to choose her. I confronted her 8 days after the clinic. I didn't mention the doctor. I asked Claire if she ever thought about trying IVF. She went completely still. Then came the same explanation I'd heard for years. It was dangerous. Doctors had warned her. She couldn't go through it emotionally. Normally, that was where I stopped. This time, I asked which doctor. Claire couldn't remember his name. I asked which hospital. She became angry. I asked when she'd last spoken to a specialist. That's when she started crying. For 6 years, Claire's tears had been the point where I put my questions away. I didn't this time. I told her I'd seen the word sterilization. The crying stopped. Immediately. I don't know why that detail hurt so much. Maybe because it showed me how quickly emotion could disappear when it stopped working. Claire didn't deny it. She sat at our kitchen table and stared at her hands. Then she admitted she'd had the procedure at 24. It was voluntary. There was no medical condition. No dangerous pregnancy. No doctor telling her she couldn't become a mother. Claire simply never wanted children. I felt strangely calm. I asked why she hadn't told me. She said she was going to. At first. Then we became serious. Then she met my family. Then she saw how I was with my brothers, kids. Every month that passed made the truth harder to say. So she created a condition. She'd researched one carefully. Something believable. Something complicated enough that I wouldn't ask too many questions. She knew me well. I hadn't. Then Claire said the sentence that destroyed whatever was left of our marriage. She told me she knew I'd leave, if I knew the truth. And I realized she was probably right. Before the wedding, before the mortgage, before 6 years of marriage, I probably would have left. Claire hadn't lied because the truth was complicated. She lied because she knew exactly what my choice would be. And she decided I shouldn't get to make it. I went upstairs. I opened the drawer where we kept passports and old documents. Claire followed me. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to touch something real. Then I found an envelope. My name was written on the front. The handwriting wasn't Claire's. Inside was a letter dated 2 months before our wedding. It was from Claire's mother. I read the first paragraph. Then the second. And suddenly, I understood something worse. Claire hadn't hidden the truth alone. Her entire family had known what she was doing to me. And one of them had tried to warn me before I married her. The letter started with an apology. Claire's mother said she didn't know if I would ever read it. She said she'd argued with Claire for months. She'd told her the truth would come out eventually. Claire refused to believe her. I kept reading. Apparently, Claire had told her family about me after our third date. The man who wanted children. The man with 2 brothers and a loud family. The man who'd already joked about wanting 3 kids someday. Her mother knew immediately. She told Claire to end things. Claire didn't. Instead, she told her family she'd already explained her situation to me. That I'd accepted it. That I knew about the sterilization. For years, they thought I knew. Then, 2 months before our wedding, Claire's mother realized I didn't. It happened at a family barbecue. Someone's toddler fell asleep on my chest. I made some stupid joke about getting practice for the future. Claire's mother heard me. She confronted Claire that night. The letter was written the next morning. She'd planned to give it to me herself. Claire found it first. And kept it. For 6 years. I was holding proof that someone had tried to give me my life back. My wife had put it in a drawer and married me anyway. Claire stood in the doorway while I read. I couldn't look at her. I asked how the letter ended up with our documents. She said she'd kept it because she felt guilty. That almost made me laugh. She kept the letter like a souvenir from the truth. I read the final paragraph. Her mother had written that she liked me. That was the cruel part. She said she thought I was good for Claire. But she couldn't watch her daughter build a marriage around a lie. She told me I deserved to decide what kind of life I wanted. I sat on the bedroom floor. Claire sat a few feet away. For the first time since I'd met her, I didn't know what I felt. I wasn't angry that she didn't want children. I need people to understand that. I was angry because I had mourned children who were never impossible. I'd watched friends become fathers and hated myself for feeling jealous. I'd defended Claire from my mother. I'd held her while she cried. I'd buried a part of myself because I thought loving her meant accepting something neither of us could change. But Claire could have changed one thing. She could have told me the truth. She chose not to. I asked if she'd ever planned to tell me. Claire said yes. I didn't believe her. Maybe she believed herself. That's different. There was always going to be another reason to wait. After the honeymoon. After we bought the house. After my brother's first child. After Christmas. After 10 years. At some point, the lie would have simply become our life. Then Claire told me something I wasn't prepared for. She'd looked into reversing the procedure. 2 years earlier. I stared at her. For 1 second, hope came back. That's humiliating to admit. After everything, one part of me still thought maybe this could be fixed. Claire had attended one consultation. Alone. The doctor told her reversal might be possible, but there were no guarantees. She never went back. Not because of the risks. Because she still didn't want children. That was the moment I finally understood. Claire hadn't changed her mind. She hadn't been confused. She hadn't made a decision at 24 and regretted it later. She knew exactly what she wanted. And she'd spent 6 years making sure I couldn't choose something different. I left the house that evening. I took the letter. Nothing else. My brother picked me up. I told him everything in his car. He didn't say much. He just drove. When we got to his house, Lily was asleep upstairs. There was a baby monitor on the kitchen counter. Every few minutes, the screen lit up when she moved. I couldn't stop looking at it. My brother eventually turned it around. I think he knew. I slept on his sofa. Claire called until my phone died. The next morning, her mother came to see me. She looked older than I remembered. Maybe I just saw her differently. She apologized. I didn't know what to say. Part of me blamed her. She wrote the letter. She knew. Why didn't she try again? Why did she come to our wedding? Why did she smile in photographs? Then I remembered Christmas. I remembered how easy it was to believe Claire when she cried. Her mother had been living with the same version of her longer than I had. That doesn't excuse it, but I understand it. Claire and I separated 3 months ago. She wants marriage counseling. I agreed to one session. I lasted 40 minutes. The counselor asked whether I could imagine rebuilding trust. I thought about it. Then I realized trust wasn't the only thing Claire had taken. Time was the part one couldn't get past. I'm 36 now. Maybe I can still become a father. Probably. But the years I spent making peace with never having children are gone. I can't get them back. Claire says she was afraid to lose me. I believe her. That's what makes this harder. She loved me. In her own way, she genuinely loved me. But she loved me enough to lie. Enough to cry in my arms over a condition she didn't have. Enough to let me fight with my mother. Enough to marry me while a letter with the truth sat hidden in a drawer. People like simple stories. Someone lies, so they're evil. Someone gets hurt, so they're innocent. Real life isn't that clean. Claire isn't a monster. She's the woman I plan to grow old with. I still miss her. Sometimes I almost call her when something funny happens because for 6 years, she was the first person I told everything. Then I remember. I told Claire everything. She just never returned the favor. I don't know if I'll ever have children. That's the truth. Maybe I waited too long. Maybe I'll meet someone. Maybe I won't. But for the first time in 6 years, that choice belongs to me again. And I think that's what I was grieving all along. Not the children I thought I couldn't have. The life my wife decided I wasn't allowed to choose.